Hello and welcome to The World Now. We begin in the U.S., where weeks of Black Lives Matter protests around the world has seen statues depicting slavery being pulled down, and the U.S. has had its fair share of the demonstrators. But President Donald Trump says he has authorized the government to arrest anyone caught trying to tear down monuments or statues, threatening they could be jailed for 10 years. He said the new order applies retroactively, so those who previously participated in bringing down memorials could be arrested. And joining me now for more perspective on this is Okenfe Lebarty, a social justice advocate. Good to have you join us, Okenfe Lebarty. Now, what do you make of this statement coming from President Trump that those who are threatening to put down monuments and statues could be arrested and jailed?
Hello, thank you for having me. I think that kind of statement is really reckless coming from the President of the United States, because at this point in time, with the issue of Black Lives Matter and with everything that's going on, the president should be more interested about uniting the country. He should be more interested in talking about issues that can really calm down the protesters, not necessarily talking about a long-term jail sentences for protesters, because at the end of the day, when you look at these these statues, they have a history of white supremacy and history of racism and histories of slavery that are behind them. And so what the protesters are saying is that, look, this statue does not necessarily represent the country. There are issues going on with this statue, and at the end of the day, something has to be done about this statue. So for the president of the United States to come out and talking about he's going to be using the Veterans Memorial Act or something to that effect to jail these protesters, I think is really reckless.
So many believe that these Confederate statues and monuments have a historical background to them. Are they historical, or are they an attempt to rewrite history?
Well, it's not. So I think the first question is historical for whom? Right, and so for the Confederate flags and those who wave the Confederate flag, for them it might necessarily be an issue of history in terms of their founding fathers and the role they played in the Union. But at the same time, to slavery and those who are descendants of slavery, they have a whole different history of what the Confederate flag and this Confederate statues actually means to them. So for the African Americans, it's a history of oppression, it's a history of racism. And so to a certain extent, do they want to keep having a repeat of issues that have happened to them and have all these Confederate statutes that are out there reminding them of the past oppressions that their ancestors went through? And so, yes, it's fine that people are talking about history, but how does that history correspond with the history of those that were actually oppressed?
So when you look at the bigger picture of ending racism, or the fight against racism in the U.S., pulling down these statues, what role does it fulfill? Where does it fit?
It's a starting step, right? It's because when you look at this statue, it is literally commemorating those that had slavery. The statues are commemorating those facts. The statues are a reminder of an oppressive and racist regime in the United States. And so I'm not necessarily sure that people want to be reminded constantly of people that not necessarily oppress them, but having a statue commemorating their oppression. Right, so that is a bigger issue, and that is what people are really offended about. That at some point this statue has to be taken down. And now, I think it's a fair point to say, look, what is the fair way of taking down the statue, right? Should it be that the protesters are taking down the statues down, or should it be some sort of a legislative act passed through either Congress or through state houses or through city councils? And so what is the right way to bring these statues down? I think that should be a bigger conversation.
All right, so let me ask you, what is the right way, do you think, should these statues be brought down?
Well, I think it has to be through the legislative process, right? So, for example, the historical, I believe it's the Historical Museum of New York City, they had the statue of President Roosevelt with a free slave, and also with a Native American, right? And so they spoke to the mayor, and I believe the mayor signed some sort of an executive order allowing the statues to be taken down. So I think it has to be a larger campaign, to take this down. I think the governors have to get involved in taking down these statues. Now, the interesting thing about these statues is that there are some of them that are more on the that were erected through local ordinances, right? And then there are others that were also erected through state ordinances. So they have to go through those legislative processes. The city council members have to be has to get involved. The state governor has to get involved and issue some sort of an executive order. And I think what people are really also talking about is it okay for protesters to be taking this down? But in the heightened state of the Black Lives Matter movement that everyone seems to be in, people are angry, right? And then when they're seeing a symbol of racist oppression, they feel that one of the things that they can't do as protesters is to take these things down. But now what is going to happen is once this protest starts dying down.
Okay, allow me butt in. Because here we're talking about President Roosevelt, who was a president in the U.S. And also there's also the statue of President Jackson, who was the 8th American president. These are presidents, as much as we say that, look, they have some sort of historical background that doesn't go well with some people, but they're also presidents. So what is the thin line here where you say, oh, some president, the statues should be taken down?
Well, again, I think that is a part of a larger conversation, right? With the issue of Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson, to a lot of people, was really a racist president, right? And so, how do you square some of the work that he did while president, and then using the 21st century mentality to literally look at what he did when he was president? And so, that because he's a president now, does it mean that some presidents are inclined to take down those statues of former presidents? We don't know, but it's clear that President Trump is definitely not going to take that out. But again, I think it has to be part of a larger conversation, because if you look at the history of America, there are lots of presidents had slavery. Thomas Jefferson had slaves. Washington had slaves. And so how do we square the fact that they were slave owners, and at the same time they were also presidents of the United States? Who gets to make this decision? And I think from what the president is saying, I don't think he's necessarily doing this in the right way. It's got to be a context of a larger conversation.
You rewrite centuries of history in the U.S. and come to the point where everyone see eye to eye on this issue?
We hope so. Will everyone ever see eye to eye? I mean, families barely see eye to eye on issues, but at the end of the day, my thing is I just hope that common sense is going to prevail.
Do you think that this is a moment of enormous reckoning for America?
Oh, perhaps. Perhaps. I think that people are tired. People are tired of being tired. There are issues that has been going on that has been swept under the rug. There are issues on the state-by-state level, on the local level, where people have been calling for police brutality. And what tends to happen is that things just get swept under the rug, or even when these officers get arrested, but they get found innocent by so-called jury of their peers. And so where is the justice in that, right? But at the same time, people are also talking about, look, there has to be a semblance of law and order. Yes, we understand there has to be a semblance of law and order, but what law and order means to certain communities is totally can be harassment, right, to a different kind of community. So is it a time of racial of reckoning? Not necessarily for the United States alone. I think for the Western countries, they really need to take this time to step back and look at their history of colonialism and look at their history of racial oppression of people of color and say, look, what is it that as a country that we can do better to make sure that our communities of color are actually feeling safe?
All right, so with the protests going on in America for several weeks now, we've seen the call for the defunding of the police. We've seen several reforms in the police and executive orders signed by President Trump. Now, can you confidently say that there will not be another Eric Garner, there will not be another George Floyd in the U.S.?
Oh, that is tough. The other day, in the midst of this protest, we just had another issue where a policeman killed a young black man in Atlanta, and that is why the protest was going on. And he was sleeping in his car. The cops came, they woke him up, and before you know it, a struggle ensued, and he got killed. So we can. It's hard to tell if this is going to happen again, but we do understand that the way the officers have been trained needs to change, right? The way the criminal justice is currently set up has to change. And those things are not good. It's not necessarily just a binary change, but these are changes that the elected officials really have to come together and put it in the legislations that they are going to be writing to make sure that when something like this happens, that the perpetrators of this crime really had to face justice.
And social justice advocate Okenfe Lebarty, many thanks for sharing your perspective with TV Studios.